Well, first of all, I do believe that, you know, Derry has one of the most amazing legacies of history of any city that I can think of. You look across the kind of the breadth of the city, you know, if you want to start with, you know, Cholmcille, the island, and the whole legend and legacy of Columba and what he did and how he changed the perception of the world in various things, which I will come back to. And then you kind of move on over the generations and you come then and you have the walls of Derry, you know, the siege, the walls, and the fact that those walls are still standing, and they're one of, in terms of Europe, I understand that they're the one of the most intact set of walls in Europe. And then you kind of come further forward, if you like, into more modern times, into the kind of the Troubles. And that's only to kind of pick out three sort of different phases of history. But I think there's an extraordinary wealth of culture in this city. Now, I could go on and talk wider than, if you like, because I'm talking historical culture. But I could go, you know, I mean, you can talk about all the things that, you know, Derry's famous for, music and whatever else. But if you just wanted to concentrate purely on the history, I don't think you're going to get in one place such a wealth of history, considering I just want to say that this place, as we are reminded, is one of the longest continuously inhabited places in Ireland. So, stretching all the way back to Derry the island, I mean, how far back do you want to go? But, you know, stretching back to, we can talk about the sort of the 5th, 6th century, going right the way through the centuries, to the writing about Derry, to the places where Derry is mentioned in, you know, 11th, 12th century books, which are downstairs, to right the way through to, as I say, the siege and on to the more modern political troubles. And that's a span of, if you like, political and social history, never mind about all the other aspects of culture. And if you wanted to start in the culture of Derry, well, you'd be here all day. You know, if you wanted to go into literature and music and whatever. But focusing, just because we're here and the Irish Cholmcille Centre, will focus on the historical aspect of the culture of Derry. How the centre became a reality, in a sense, by the use of great resilience, determination, refusal to be daunted, cheek, brass neck, and an amazing wealth of support from all sorts of people. I'll give you the short version, because if I gave you the long version, you'd still be here at Christmas. We were first founded in 2002. I had been principal of a secondary school and retired in 2002, thinking as I was to retire to my garden or whatever. This project came up and somebody said, would you like to be chair? I took on the chair, whatever. And we bid for funds. I mean, we got 1.7 million pounds of public funding, Heritage Lottery Fund, Northern Ireland Tourist Board, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, the Diocese of Derry put in some money, Derry City Council. So that's the funding bit of it. But it did take a massive amount of time then to get the funding together, but then also with the help of people, for example, from the local Heritage and Museum Services here, you know, what story were we going to illustrate? What artefacts had we got? Because obviously if you're going to talk about Cholmcille, there are no artefacts left from that time. And yet we have managed to acquire such a wealth of aspects and artefacts for this place through their help. So if you said to me, how did it come about? You know, as I say, cheek, determination, refusal to be discouraged, a recognition that there was something very worthwhile here that we didn't want to lose the opportunity of doing. First of all, you had a beautiful building, dating from 1813, which has a wonderful history of its own. So the building was falling down, the building was utterly derelict. I think another winter and the building would have collapsed. So we had a beautiful building to start with. And then we had, if you like, a meaning to put into the building associated with this site. So as far as I could see, that was a win-win situation. And here we are. It has only taken up to this stage, 12 years. But, you know, it has all been worth it. And people do say to me, well, in many ways, that lots of difficult projects where you're combining a whole number of funders, where you've got an old building that's going to fall down, and where you've got so many people kind of involved who have a share in it and putting together the interpretation, that it is actually going to take a long time. It usually takes most people, I gather, 8 years. It took us 12. So, but anyway, all I can say is this building alone has been rescued for posterity, and it has enhanced the surroundings, it's enhanced the grounds of the Long Tower Church, which is an interesting church in its own right. We've restored a beautiful listed set of steps down the side of the building. It is a listed building as well. And we've saved another building for Derry where so many of the beautiful old buildings have been destroyed. I know that's kind of a long answer, but anyway.
And that would have been a big enough step for Derry by itself. It would have been a big milestone.
To save the building?
Yeah.
Yes, because you do know that, in the past there is a great emphasis now on saving old buildings. We did go over the argument. Some people went over the argument and said to me, it'd be cheaper to tumble this building and you could put up something cheaper in its place, and that no doubt is true. But on the other hand, old buildings, first of all, it kind of matches its surroundings, and old buildings in a way have an importance of their own, because you have to think you're not just saving it for today or tomorrow or for, there are lots of people now who are at this school. You're not saving it for them, it's for posterity that you're saving it. And I think if you let a lot of these, it's not that you should get hung up on the past, but that sometimes the beauty of old buildings is the thing that mesmerises you from the past. And I think that's the thing that's kind of worth preserving. And I think more and more people in Derry are beginning to kind of see that although it does cost more to rescue an old building, there isn't any doubt about it, but what you rescue keeps all the appeal of the past and preserves it for the future, which is really what we were trying to do. Well, there's a most interesting story, and I'll try to give you the short version of it. In 1813, there was a priest here called Father Cornelius O'Mullen, and he wanted a school. You have to remember that in 1813 there was no government directive, a long time ago, that children should attend primary school. Now, in fact, the law that set up the national schools is another word for primary schools, didn't come in until 1832. So Father O'Mullen in 1813, he was way before his time, saying we need to set up a school here, a primary school. But he had, his bishop and himself did not see eye to eye. In conjunction with Irish history, Father Cornelius was a friend or connection of Daniel O'Connell, who would have been, associated with Catholic, who led the campaign for Catholic emancipation. And again, Catholic emancipation didn't become a reality until 1829. So here you have Father Cornelius in 1813 saying, we want education for the children. There were great rows between himself and the bishop. The bishop was much more, I gather, an establishment figure and didn't want to be sort of, rocking the boat, for want of a better word. And there was a riot here in the churchyard. There were disagreements about the school, because although the advertisement for the school appeared in 1813 for contractors to come along and build it, the school itself didn't actually get built until 1825. Father Cornelius himself finished up at one stage acting as a second in a duel in which Daniel O'Connell was involved. And anyway, he got into trouble with the bishop, finished up in jail. I'm fairly sure it was Derry Jail, the jail that's out there in Bishop Street. Finished up in jail and was eventually sent off, and he died in Argentina or somewhere. Anyway, the school was then built in 1825. Eventually the Mercy nuns took it over in the 1850s, 60s type of time. They ran it then as a primary school, not as an infant school. And then in 1893 they built the new school, which is just up in the schoolyard. And one wonderful thing that I would draw your attention to, which is here, we have an exercise book downstairs from a child who was at this school in 1893. His family gave us his exercise book, and in the exercise book he describes being here at the school and the new school in 1893, new in those days, being built there, describing the building of the new school and describing this school as being kind of a bit too small and a bit uncomfortable, and watching the new school being built. And we have the child's exercise book in a case downstairs, which I think is a wonderful piece of history.
Stories like that should be preserved, do you think?
Oh, totally. Because we have this book obviously behind glass for obvious reasons, because it's a very precious relic and it's precious to the family. But when you look through this child's exercise book and there are kind of various essays, first of all, I'm terrifically impressed at the handwriting. Secondly of all, if you're at primary school, what age are you going to be? 8, 9, 10? The writing is beautiful, the spelling is very good. But these children, which is very impressive, they were doing algebra. They were doing, their writing, their description, and he's writing sometimes about events that happened, about the death of somebody in the locality, about the weather, about the winter weather. So that sometimes if we turn over some of the pages, we've kept it open at the page about the school, but if you turn over some of the pages, it's wonderful to read and to see this book and these stories, and as I say, reflecting the times that were all around him as he was in school, plus the level of the subjects that they were doing is quite mesmerising. No primary school that I know, no primary school child that I know does algebra these days. Yes, well, I've already mentioned the funders, and to be honest, we couldn't have done it without, I mean, these things just can't be done. I talked about 1.6 million or thereabouts. Heritage Lottery Fund funded us, Tourist Board funded us, the three big funders, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, who the built heritage section to do with the preservation of old buildings, they funded us. The Diocese of Derry funded us as well. One of the big things that we have drawn to the attention of the authorities is this. In order to do a project like this, you actually need a cash flow, because what we had to do was we had to pay the bills, pay the builder, and then get somebody else then to repay us. So you need you need a bank loan. Well, these days nobody's going to give you a bank loan. Plus the fact bank loans are extremely expensive. So again, we were able to get cash flow funding again from the Diocese of Derry. Now, of course, it'll all be paid back, but it would never have happened. And we keep saying no small project in this country is ever going to happen, because how does a small group of community people get their hands on the kind of money that we needed to have in our bank to pay all the bills before we could draw it back from the funders? Now, I've said that several times. We were lucky in the backers that we had, but without them, this just simply would never have happened. And I don't know how other small projects manage to do that. And I know that's a great concern to people who have a small project. Where do they get that cash flow to keep the show on the road until they can draw it back from the funders? That makes for a particular difficulty. Anyway, we were lucky. So that's the kind of the range of funders that we had. But the other thing I would want to draw attention to were the number of, it's not funding in terms of money, see the number of volunteers that we had. I mean, first of all, the Board of Trustees, they're all volunteers. They have all worked as hard as can be. Some of them for longer than others. Some of them are older, like myself, and have worked for the 12 or 14 years. Totally free of charge, totally volunteers, meetings, papers, write this, write that, put in that bid, da-da-da. I mean, that kind of work, and I'm not, if I use myself, I'm only an example of one. Loads of people offered us support in kind, and would offer us services for free, and so when you talk about funding, when people say to me, well, 1.6 million pounds worth of funding, if I counted in all the man hours or woman hours even that all the people that I know have contributed, you'd be easily looking at £2 million. All that, and that I think is a great tribute. It's a great tribute, I think, to the community that's here, but it's also a great tribute to the hold that Columba, or the hold is maybe the wrong word, but the tradition that there is about Columba in this city, and the big thing, of course, is, which I haven't come to at all, is the fact that Columba is a saint who is he's accepted by both sides. You've got St Columba's Cathedral, you've got St Columba's Long Tower Church. That's just to give you sort of one small example. So kind of his legacy is very, very powerful in this city, which even in one of its names, actually one of its derivations, in one of the many names of Derry, has its name. I mean, people would know it's called Cholmcille, as one of the names of Derry, amongst its many other names. I think Columba and Cholmcille have almost as many names as Derry itself. I'm sorry, I'm talking about funders. I'm making the point that funding, money is extremely important, but it wasn't the only funding that we got, because you get so much what we call in-kind help that was that you couldn't have paid for if you'd come to the bit. And that was extremely valuable. It's extremely important, and any small project, and because some people have sort of said to me, give us a wee bit of advice, and sometimes if it depends on the mood, I would say, well, if I was you, I wouldn't start from here. But the amount, and the authorities, let me call it the fund, the powers that be that have the pockets, they don't always recognise the sheer volume of work. I mean, if I took you to my house and you saw the papers that I couldn't throw out over the years, stacked, now some fine day I'm going to have a ritual bonfire, but mountains and mountains of paper, and that's only my house. I could talk about the other trustees who've got mountains of papers and bank statements and this and that and the other thing, stacked up all over the place. So that, and the important thing, of course, about that is that people are putting their hearts in a way instead of their pocket, and that's at least as important, that people get involved and contribute things to you. That to me is at least as important as the funders. And the sheer amount of passion that there is about this place has impressed even me. I mean, we opened this place, and I know this is maybe slightly off the question, but it's worth thinking about. We opened this place before we put in the exhibition, when it was just the building, for past pupils of the school, say about the month of April. I think we had 600 people turn up. I thought there'd be 30 here, and I thought we'll be hanging about all day. At the end of the day, I have to say, by about 5:30, I was jingling the keys, basically saying to people, we closed at 4 o'clock. So there's an immense pride in this place, pride that comes from the community, the past pupils. So the sheer, that helped to float the whole thing. Of course the funding floated it, couldn't have worked without the funding. But that wealth of support, both in people who volunteered to support us or in people who simply turned up on the open day to say, this is lovely, that all is extremely important.
Mm.
First of all, you see, when you've got a listed building, you aren't allowed to you're not allowed to change, you have to change as little as possible. A number of things had to be changed. I mean, for example, we had to put a new roof on. You can imagine this place was literally falling apart. I mean, the roof rafters had gone. I will tell you a story, but I was here about a good while ago, it's at least 6 or 7 years ago, and I was standing on the floor below, just up against that wall. It was just whatever, and that was okay. We went then down into the basement where the kind of the cafe tea room area is at the moment. And when I looked up, the floorboards that I had been standing on were no longer joined to the wall. They had pulled away. The walls are bowed, and in fact, if you look at the outside, you'll actually see there's one place on the outside where the walls are bowed. But it was decided that we would leave that because it was a sort of a feature of the building. So the building was in extraordinarily bad state. New chimneys, new roof timbers. We did try to preserve as much of the wood in the windows as possible. It wasn't always possible because a lot of the wood had rotted. One of the saddest things that happened was, we had a lot of genuine old glass in the building. You know, the old glass with the wobbly bits on it. And of course the building had been sheeted up for years, and you couldn't go down the steps. The whole place was sheeted off because of the danger. There was a big crack in the wall out there that you could have put your hand into. But anyway, the builders were building away, and they finally took off the shutters, got the building up and running, took the shutters off the windows, to take the windows out and repair them. And some gentlemen, I assume, from this community, they may not have been gentlemen, came and they broke practically all the old glass in the windows. Well, I think at that day I wept, because then we had to replace it with modern glass. No, we replaced it with modern kind of wavy glass. But anyway, that was a sad occasion. But sure, anyway, these things happen. The building is gorgeous. That's a great tribute to the builders, Woodvale Builders, and to the architects, HMD, who had to, you have to abide by very strict heritage guidelines. You're not allowed to do this. They had to do a certain type of mortar, for example, on the outside walls. One feature I would draw your attention to, although it no longer looks the same as it did, this stepped area is actually part of the original building. In the past, small children were taught, the steps are basically the same size, and they were small, I find it hard to visualise, but anyway, there were small desks on some of these steps that children were taught in a stepped area. The teacher was down there and the children were here. I mean, when I went to primary school a long time ago, I was taught sort of in an area like this, and if you go downstairs, you'll actually see that the school, the floor, the building is built so that the floor below this has a sloped ceiling to accommodate the stepped area. Now, this is unrecognisable, obviously, from what it was, but this is part of the original building. That we if we had decided, we wouldn't have been allowed to take it out, even if we'd wanted to. It happened that it worked very well as an audiovisual area. Come on, you're all invited. The answer is yes. Now, we have two great people working here in the centre. We have a centre manager, Mairead Fox, and an education officer, Patty Holly, and they're both working on, building up a collection or, of volunteers. And first of all, there's a new volunteer has just landed there today when I arrived in. The important thing you see about volunteers is that people often see volunteers as a one-way thing. In other words, come you in here and you help us do this and do that and whatever. Volunteering is very much a two-way process. In other words, yes, come in, do reception, serve a cup of tea, smile sweetly, explain to people what things are about. But also we're very much engaged in what also can we give the young person, experience, confidence, give them a bit of experience in, even simple things like meeting and greeting people, learning a bit of the story, saying to people, come and I'll show you the interesting bits here and explain them to you. That's a part of volunteering that I'm in other words, that it has an educational aspect for the young person. It's not simply, that you come and help us. We are also going to do what we can to provide you with opportunities, to provide the volunteers with opportunities for further development. If they've got special skills they want to use, if they're good at social media, we'll go ahead, advance our social media platform, whatever. We'll see what they've got to offer and try and give them an opportunity to offer to an even greater extent. This is probably the same answer. A refusal to be daunted. Motivated very much by what, it's very important sometimes, I think, to visualise in your head what it is that you're working towards. And it was that kind of original sort of vision. What is it that we were trying to do? We were trying to save the old building, but in order to save it, we also had to give it a new lease of life. We had to give it a purpose. There's no point in renovating an old building. You won't get public money to renovate an old building and then close the front door. So it was a combination of making use of two things. A story that isn't told in Derry. I mean, I've worked very closely with the museum services because obviously whatever Columban story they were telling down in the Tower Museum, we didn't want to be walking on their toes. So we have kind of told a much more detailed story. I have worked with them. They have obviously been extremely inspiring to me, Bernadette Walsh and Margaret Edwards at the Tower Museum, in the sense of helping me to sort of see, well, what is the story here that we want to tell and where can we find this story and how do we do it? And I think we have it all around us and we haven't finished. There's a bit more to go where we can develop aspects of the story as we go. We're only open since the 9th of June, so it's going to take a wee while to kind of settle in a bit and identify things that maybe we kind of can develop. I mean, just behind your head, and I think it's one of the things I'm always fascinated by, there's a panel there, first, best, oldest, and it's worth realising that, some of the first and the best and the oldest things in Ireland are all associated with Columba, and you can read it for yourselves. It's that panel there behind you. Yes, the big dream is to keep it going and to make it self-sustaining. That's my big dream. In other words, that a few years down the road that we would be able to sustain ourselves. We're a charity. We don't make a profit. Well, we make a profit. It just simply we're not interested in making profit. But if we do make a profit, which we'd hope to do, it just simply gets ploughed back into paying for the electricity bill, paying staff, developing maybe leaflets, developing aspects, linking with other places, inviting people in. My big dream is that this place would make itself sustainable so that it can just continue on developing, reaching out. Because I'm just going to pause for a moment on the reaching out, and I have already mentioned the idea of Cholmcille, all the names he has, being very much the shared saint in this city, and something that's very important in the divided community is something that people have to share. Some people might share him as a saint, in the normal sense of the word, but make no mistake about it, this guy did things that were extraordinary in the life of the times that we're in. First of all, he was part of the monastic settlement that was responsible for wonderful books like the Book of Kells, which is considered nearly a wonder of the world, and there's a facsimile copy of it in there. He was responsible, for example, he was one of the first people to record history in a chronological fashion. they were called the annals, and there's a set of annals at the far side of that there. They're obviously they're not as old as Columba, but they're a set of annals. That was the idea, that history should be recorded, on a chronological basis. That was his idea. He also, in many ways, through his and he certainly was a guy with a bit of a temper. I mean, he was no kind of plaster saint, but through his sending himself into exile as in repentance for what he had done, so many other monks followed him, and there are monasteries right throughout Europe that were created by the followers of Columba, so that he wasn't simply what I'd call a plaster saint who spent his time in the monastery. His reach beyond that was much, much more powerful, and in particular the illuminated manuscripts, many of which are extremely famous. There is the one that's in there, but there are others here that are mentioned, the Book of Durrow and the Book of Lindisfarne, extraordinarily famous. And one interesting thing I read about 6 or 7 years ago, it was published by the Daily Telegraph. Daily Telegraph did a survey in England, I remember this is, and they were talking about who did people think should be the top 10 people to be studied by school children. Who was number one? I couldn't believe it. Columba, because he converted he converted to Christianity. They would have, obviously as a Christian leader, he was in the company of Winston Churchill, and do I remember any of the other ones? I was so stunned when I saw this, because they realised the impact that he had the bringing of Christianity to Scotland, down into northern England, and then the contribution of the monks that followed him, spread throughout other parts of England and into Europe. And there's a map down there in the corner showing you some of the monasteries that are still in existence in Germany, France and Italy, to name but 3 countries, where you have these monasteries that were founded by his followers. Very much so. Very much so. I mean, we have people in here who say, this is beautiful, I didn't know it was here. We have produced leaflets, we have produced, in the newspapers and whatever else. That takes a wee bit of time to build, and there's more ways of doing it than simply producing the leaflets and producing the videos. Having people in to say, come and look at us, would you like to come and visit us? We will be starting a schools programme anytime now, where schools will be invited in. In fact, we've had a wonderful offer from Martin McCrossan here in the town, where he would offer us, children coming to visit us, he would offer a combined tour of the walls and then bring the children down here for a visit of this place with one of his tour guides, which is an absolutely wonderful offer. But that's another way of promoting yourself, so people get to know that you're here, know what you do, and then of course children go home and say, oh Mummy and Daddy, look, you need to come and have a look at this place. We hope. But yes, we know that we need to do a lot more marketing. I think because we're only in post since actually we opened the doors on the 12th of June, and there's been a lot of things to be seen to since that. We are working on a low scale marketing, but yes, we know that we need to up the ante on that considerably.